Sago, it is Friday, November 24th. Welcome to Let's Talk Native on the LTN Radio Network. This program breaks all the rules for Native radio. No buffalo speeches, no mystic healing, no special Indian prayers. We tackle the real issues facing Native people with a look back at our glorious and our grave history, a tough look at where we're at now, and a look forward to our ongoing battles for sovereignty and autonomy. Let's Talk Native is produced in association with Iroquois Promotions on the LTN Radio Network. Streaming live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation and simulcast and rebroadcast on the Gwe CKWE in Tandanega. You can find us streaming live at www.ltnradionet.com. And, of course, we are live streaming on Facebook. So you can catch our live stream here and offer your comments and your questions and your suggestions and your criticisms. And I'll be looking for those comments in real time. So I'm John Kane. I am your show's host and producer, and I'm joined in studio by Jake Proud, who is running the board and the cameras for not just for the live stream, but for our Let's Talk Native TV channel on YouTube. You can subscribe to that channel and catch not only the shows that we do here, but the videos that we record on a number of topics. Our studio engineer is Kelly McMillan. And I want to thank her for her fine work. And the opening song was by Jimmy Wolf. That was Zigzag Lightning. Jimmy Wolf, one of my favorites. And so we play his music often, as I do with many of the guys that I have gotten to know and gotten a chance to see over the years. Look, I got a couple of interesting things I want to talk about. First off, I did a show, recorded a show for my New York show yesterday. I didn't make the trip. So if you get a chance, you should check that show out because unlike most of my shows where I usually try to stir the pot and, perhaps talk about some controversial issues or weigh in on, some of the issues that we face, I took a breather and we just did music. Now, the music sometimes raises some controversy anyway by itself. Especially with many of the artists that I featured, like Murray Porter and others, Buffy St. Marie. Some of these guys, when they write their songs, they write the songs specifically to address some of our issues. So it did give me an opportunity to talk some about Native issues. But for the most part, it was a 2-hour show that featured several artists and several tracks by each of those artists, with a little bit of an explanation, some explanation to both the songs, the artists, my relationship with some of those artists, and it was a pretty good program. And it's not one that you have to watch. I mean, obviously, I'm doing the same thing that you would be doing. I'm listening to music through most of the show, so I do encourage you to check it out. It's on YouTube. You can find it if you subscribe to our channel. You can find it right there. I've also posted it as a SoundCloud audio, and of course, if you click on to the group pages, especially the Let's Talk with John Kane on WBAI group page. I've got the YouTube video posted as a link there. So, if you just want to, click onto something and hear some Native music with a little bit of explanation to that, I encourage you to do so. I don't usually promote, spend this much time promoting one show on the other show, but I figure I'd do this one because this was kind of a unique thing. I think the idea of doing a show that's so heavily weighted towards Native music is something that I'd like to see us do more of. So, all right, let me get into it. Of course, yesterday was Turkey Day, and a lot of people got together with family and and that kind of thing, which is a good thing. And I'm not going to criticize, of all the things that are appropriated or misappropriated from Native peoples, the idea of the United States, and Canada does the same thing, although on a different date, declaring a certain day a Thanksgiving Day, like once a year. We wonder what's wrong with the rest of the year, because in our culture we have Thanksgivings that are stretched out throughout the entire year. But look, the most offensive thing about Thanksgiving as an American holiday is the untruths that are associated with and the mistruths or lies, however you want to call it, that are associated with its origins. I mean, this whole idea of teaching 5-year-olds, kindergartners about happy little pilgrims and happy little Indians, when in reality, the first declared Thanksgiving, day of Thanksgiving declared by the colonists, was a day of Thanksgiving that was declared after killing 700 Pequots. Just to be clear, this idea that there was this joyous, festive occasion, including a feast, it never really happened. I mean, the closest thing to any documentation of a Thanksgiving feast had more to do with the Wampanoag hearing shots being fired out of these rusty old muskets from the Pilgrims, and going to see what the commotion was, and realizing that they were just shooting off. They weren't hunting. I mean, so the native men brought food to the Pilgrims, and they did share in a meal, but it was by no means some sort of formal celebration of Thanksgiving between the two. So again, it's a myth. In many places in the across Indian country, there are different ways that native groups, not so much the so-called the FedRec, as I call them, the federally recognized tribes, they pretty much kind of avoid the controversy of giving a formal statement on Thanksgiving. But there are activist groups, not just AIM, but other groups that have declared Thanksgiving a national day of mourning. And in fact, every year at Plymouth, at the site of the Plymouth Rock, there are natives that assemble there, led by the Wampanoag, to basically formalize this national day of mourning. So that's one of the things that happens. Now, another thing that has become a bit of a tradition is this sunrise ceremony at Alcatraz, and this year was kind of interesting because they invited Colin Kaepernick. Now, that in of itself is to me not a big leap. I think Colin Kaepernick is an appropriate person to invite to something like this. He not only has taken a stand against racism, especially as it related to police abuse and the abuse of force, the abuse of deadly force used against people of color, and he included all people of color there. This wasn't just a Black Lives Matter thing that Colin Kaepernick started with the whole first taking a seat and then taking a knee for the national anthem. He made sure that he included all people of color, and it's a thing. The funny thing is that he has increasingly become aware of the strife that Native people face, and in particular with Standing Rock, he has weighed in. And in fact, when he made his pledge to raise $1 million for various causes, among those causes, I think it might have been $50,000 that he had sent to the Standing Rock health clinic. So and I heard some people say, well, he's really put his money where his mouth is. This isn't just about Colin Kaepernick donating to Standing Rock. To me, the stance that he's taken in general is not only just noteworthy, it's praiseworthy, and to see he was actually honored at the sunrise ceremony at Alcatraz, and he was invited to come. Now, and I got to say something else. Colin Kaepernick doesn't show up at a lot of events. I'm not saying that he's become a recluse by any means, but he is not exactly shown up to rallies and into these big media events. Even rallies that have been associated with his name, he pretty much stays back. So it is interesting that he showed up at this at the sunrise ceremony at Alcatraz, and of course it's near San Francisco, kind of his old stomping grounds. That's where he played football last. So I mean, it was interesting that he showed. He wore a T-shirt with Sitting Bull on the front of it, which was I thought was pretty cool. But having said all that, and having acknowledged the respect that was not only shown to Colin Kaepernick, but the respect that was shown by Colin Kaepernick, the haters came out, and there were a lot of them. And I'm not saying it was overwhelming, but the fact that there are Native people that really got into trashing Colin Kaepernick is somewhat confusing. I mean, what it really indicates to me is just how assimilated and how bought into the submissive, notion of patriotism that that so many Americans have, and this blind patriotism. You could argue that if you consider yourself a patriot of a country, then you should not be somebody who is so enamored by your country that you don't hold it to task and that you don't offer criticism and want your country to improve. But but that's not what patriotism in the United States is. Patriotism in the United States is just blindness. It's like we're the greatest and that's it. And and if we're not the greatest, then you jump into the Trump bandwagon with, well, let's make it great again, as if there was some magic date in American history where you can go back and say, oh yeah, that's when America was great. Well, I always ask the question, when was that date? What was it? During slavery? Was it during removal of native territories? Was it when you could, get a bounty for killing a native, or whether you could lynch a black man? Was it when you could, lock up a Japanese, a U.S. citizen of Japanese descent because of Pearl Harbor? When was it? When was it when women couldn't vote? I mean, when was that day in American history that America was great? And when people talk about making America great again, you show me the year that you want to return, that you want to see the United States return to, and if you show me that, I'll show you everything that was wrong, with that calendar date. So I mean, you get into this whole patriotism issue, and I'll tell you, there are Native people who weighed in on Colin Kaepernick and called him down. Some people suggested that it was an insult to Sitting Bull that he would wear his image on his shirt. Look, Sitting Bull earned all of the the praise that he got. But having said that, let's not forget the Sitting Bull in his moments of weakness, not only joined Buffalo Bill Cody and his Wild West show, and he and Geronimo were both used to march in inaugurations for presidents, and and that's kind of embarrassing, really. So I'm not saying this to call Sitting Bull down, but to suggest that because Colin Kaepernick wore an image of Sitting Bull, and that image when he was still standing up, and to suggest that he was insulting. I mean, I saw one guy post literally calling Kaepernick a scumbag. And I see this stuff, and I'm thinking, you guys are twisted. You guys are lost. Your identity has been shattered, and now you live in an existence where you don't know who you are. You don't know what your identity is. You don't know what to root for or what to root against. What to push, what change to push for. I mean, if you're so blindly patriotic to the United States that the mere act of taking a knee during the national anthem would cause you to hate an individual and absolutely refuse to acknowledge what it is that he's trying to call attention to, that's just incredible to me. I mean, you expect that, like I said, you expect that out of redneck America. I mean, you would expect that out of the the political right and the moronic Trump followers that are out there. You would expect that. I mean, it would still be wrong. It would still be ignorant. But when I see people who claim to be Native, and some of them are, legitimately Native, just jumping all over Colin Kaepernick and just condemning him for his protest. I mean, I'm just amazed by that. And again, I'm not suggesting that that most of the posts that I saw on Facebook and Twitter and that kind of stuff was by no means was it a field day on condemnation for Colin Kaepernick, but there were enough of them there that I found it particularly disturbing. And I think we have to be again, we talk about it all the time on the show, critical thinking. Where's the critical thinking? As a Native person, when do you step back and say, you know what? This whole great white father thing hasn't really worked out very well. And at what point do you start to realize that we have been abused, and that abuse hasn't stopped yet? And so when you jump on to with the political right of American of the American political spectrum, so you can condemn Colin Kaepernick, I'm thinking, what the hell are you even thinking? I mean, Colin Kaepernick didn't do anything to incite riots. He didn't break any windows. He didn't deface anything. I mean, he literally did the kind of similar thing that Muhammad Ali did. Took a stand. In this case, a C or an E. Took a stand against something that he thought warranted attention. And it cost him. It cost him, this is the prime time of his athletic career. And he may not play football again. And and maybe he shouldn't. Maybe he should not concede to play for an organization, the NFL, that is so mired in racism. I mean, and it's incredible. It's incredible that the NFL could be so racist, considering 70 to 80% of the athletes that play in the NFL are black. But that's what it is. And the fact that our people, just some of our people, and maybe it's because they're football fans. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know what would possess a native person to become a Trump follower. I mean, I don't think that we, I've said this before, I don't think we should be following or be sycophantic to any of their leadership, right or left, Hillary or Trump, Obama or, Bush, any of them. I don't think that we should, be propping those guys up. They aren't our presidents. They aren't our leaders. They aren't our representatives. And we should be clear about that. And we aren't. And part of the reason we aren't is because, again, part of it is the identity crisis that Native people find themselves in. But the other part that adds to this thing is the conflicts that Native people have over their governing structures. So many, very, very little of what I would honestly call traditional government exists anymore. And even those that claim to be traditional government are anything but. It all comes down to this whole notion of being federally recognized as a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States. Now, I'm not saying that everybody that all native territories have submitted to that, at least not officially. I think it is the way the United States says they recognize territories, and obviously, if you're applying for federal recognition, you're doing it knowing that that's what it is. But if the United States has kind of reduced its recognition of our once sovereign nations to this shadow of what it once was, this idea of a tribe, band, or nation of Indians subordinate to the laws of the United States, that doesn't mean that we conceded to that. I know people can come off and, oh yeah, it's not really a nation, it's a corporation and all that stuff. And there may be some truth to some of that. But to suggest that every native territory in the US and Canada have submitted themselves as mere extensions of the Canadian or federal government, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think there's some that clearly haven't, and certainly much of the leadership has. But I think this is what adds to this whole question of identity and loyalty. I mean, do we have any sort of obligation to the United States or Canada? I mean, I know we still serve at disproportionately high levels in the Canadian and U.S. military. It doesn't make sense to me, considering what those same military enterprises have done to our people, and that's why kind of why I speak out about that as well. But I think that all goes into this confusion about who we are in our identity. I think that just adds to it all. And and again, I think that Colin Kaepernick has is a good guy. I think he's done the right thing. He's made his commitment to fighting injustice, and it has had a cost. I don't mean not just a cost because he's making donations out of the fortune he's made, playing professional sports, but it's had its cost because that career has been cut short. Now, obviously there may have been other opportunities that have presented themselves to him. I mean, he's suing the NFL. He'll probably, write a book or, who knows, they'll have a movie made after. I mean, look, Colin Kaepernick is not somebody who I think is at risk of being impoverished by any means. But, there's a cost that we all take that takes its toll on all of us. That isn't necessarily always financial. That's the easy thing for people to notice. The financial, stake that is at risk, I guess. But in many of these situations, I mean, I think about native territories. There's something about being native that does invoke a real pride. And yet, if you were to ask somebody, what is it that you're proud of? I mean, let's face it. We lead in all the categories, all the lists that you don't want to be on the top of. We lead those lists. No, and I'm not saying that because I'm not proud to be native. I'm saying because in this notion of being native, there is this hope. There's this sense of hope that we are going to regain some of that standing that we once had. And I think that isn't a false hope. I think there are people who are working at it every single day. Unfortunately, it's not always quote unquote tribal leadership, the federally recognized tribal leadership that's working in that. And so you have conflicts within territories. But I see people all over, within the territories, within what I would say the private sector, I guess, not just the elected officials, but I see people all the time demonstrating a strong understanding of identity and sovereignty, and oftentimes they find themselves at odds with their own elected leadership or recognized leadership, and that's part of a challenge. So when one of the things that I think I think was demonstrated by Colin Kaepernick being honored at the sunrise ceremony was our people taking that step to reach beyond, I guess the obvious when it comes to native issues, and I think to those organizers of this sunrise ceremony for them to have reached out to the Colin Kaepernick, I think it was a notable thing. So I was pleased to see it. And I won't say that I was terribly disturbed by the haters weighing, and I expected it. And I figured, well, there's that makes an opportunity for us to discuss it and to address some of those issues. Look, we're getting down to the bottom of the hour. When I come back, I want to take this conversation to the next level, because what Standing Rock did was it brought a lot of people together. Now, I'm not saying it didn't bring it together somewhat haphazardly, and it was not certainly the smoothest gathering, I guess. I mean, there was plenty of factionalism there, but I guess the power of seeing that many people gather together, and again, how it affected people. I mean, it took a long time, but we finally got the mainstream media covering this thing. It started out with with kind of these like Unicorn Riot and a couple of these. I don't know what do you call these kind of journalists that are I don't know, more than freelance. They're almost they're like activists, I guess, to show up at these events. And but we finally got the mainstream media talking about it. I mean, all the networks were talking about it. I'm not saying they represented it perfectly accurately, but we certainly raised the issue. Now, unfortunately, the pipeline got built. If there's any question in anybody's mind, the pipeline is there, and there's oil flowing through it today, which is, which means the problem continues. And what it also means that for all of that unity and for all of those people who are gathered, we didn't accomplish our goal. So I want to talk about that when we come back, because I want to talk about not just unity, but what we need to do to establish better relationships from territory to territory, and not just always be concentrating on how important it is that we have, a representative in Ottawa or in Washington, D.C. So we'll talk about that when we come back. Look, we'll take a break here, and we'll come back and we'll kick this thing around some more. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native.
I said somebody.
Came on the radio, a guitar instrumental, and it changed everything.
Link Ray, it's rock and roll.
Rumble. Yeah, that's the one.
Rumble.
Hey, Rumble.
Rumble had the power to help me say, I'm going to be a musician.
And then I found out that he was an Indian.
Music that we know here in the United States is fully supported by input from Native and Indigenous people.
Say hello, this is John Kane from Let's Talk. Come join Cindy Campbell from the Midnight Ravers on I Wednesday, November 29th at 7:30 p.m. for the screening of Rumble, the Indians Who Rock the World, at the Cinema Arts Center in Huntington, New York. All right, that is a screening we are doing in New York, down in Huntington on Long Island this coming week. So if you're in that area, and even if you're not in the area, keep this film in mind, because I think this film is important. I think it does something that hasn't been done before. It kind of chronicles and details and documents just what kind of influence Native musicians have had on contemporary music, all genres of contemporary music. So, I think it is important, and I think that you would be well served to learn some of this, because this has some of the biggest names in certainly in entertainment making those acknowledgments. And and one of the things that they make clear, guys like Steve Van Zandt and Stephen Perry, Robbie Robertson, and the like, these guys are saying, why is it that nobody knew this? How has this not been acknowledged before? So if you get a chance, again, it's Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. It is a film that's making its way around in a lot of the independent theaters and that kind of stuff. By all means, get a chance to take a look at this film. We will be screening it on Wednesday, November 29th at 7:30 p.m. at the Cinema Arts Center in Huntington, New York. That's out on Long Island. So I wanted to mention that. Hey, I also want to mention my sponsors. I want to give some props to those guys who help us do what we do here, and including helping us make the trip to New York and do some of the fine radio that we do in New York City as well. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses, Eric White in ERW Enterprises. I want to thank good friends like Ed Schindler and Cynthia Trice and Neville Spring, Sugar Montour, and the Seneca Nation, and many others who have helped the program to continue to educate, entertain, and inform for the last 7 years. We are in our 8th year. We wouldn't have been able to be here if we didn't have a lot of support along the way. And again, I can't say enough about those guys who continue to support, but I also want to acknowledge those who have supported in the past. And we wouldn't have made it through some of those years of buying commercial airtime if we didn't have the advertisers and the sponsors and the donors. So I thank you as well. But like I said, I got to give special props to those guys who continue to support what we're doing here. I want to thank all of you for joining in the fight and doing your part. I also want to thank Unity Stream and Apache Radio Net for providing our streaming. And I want to thank CKWE, the Gway in Tandanega, for both the simulcast and the rebroadcast, as well as Netroots Radio, Real People's Media, and Indigenous Resistance Radio for carrying Let's Talk Native on their networks. And, of course, I want to thank all of you who take the time to share the streaming video, who share the SoundCloud postings, and who share the videos that we post up on YouTube. And, of course, we do have a YouTube channel, and that channel is Let's Talk Native TV. I encourage you to subscribe to our channel, and you'll get notifications every time we post up a new video. So I encourage you to do that. So, all right, let me get back into it. As I was saying before the break, we saw an outpouring of not just Native unity, but allies who were really putting their safety and security and their well-being, on the line to go to Standing Rock, especially through some of the harshest parts of the winter, to go out there and support the fight to stop that pipeline from going through, the Dakota Access Pipeline from going through. At some point, I heard there was as many as 10,000 people. Somebody told me that the tent city that was erected as a part of this encampment, at one point would have been the third largest populated village, or whatever you want to call it, in North Dakota. That's how many people had. There are not a lot of big cities in North Dakota, so so that's how many people had gathered. Now, it'd be nice. It would be a nice thought if everybody was in complete unison and unified there. That wasn't the case. But it was a demonstration of unity, the likes of which we have never really seen. It was kind of a historic event. But the lessons learned from it should be, well, how do you create unity? And what do you do to really sustain a unified effort in anything, whether it's fighting a pipeline or any kind of other environmental degradation or promoting sovereignty or whatever it is, whether we're fighting a state or states, whether we're fighting a province or provinces, or whether we're fighting the U.S. or Canada. How do we sustain this stuff? Well, part of it is preparation and being proactive. One of the things that I find a little bit disturbing is that we respond to stuff. We are reactive, like I said, not proactive. Standing Rock, in many ways brought out some of the best in people. In a few instances, it brought out some of the bad, but it did bring out some of the best in people. So how do we plan forward? Well, part of it is not waiting till there's a crisis before you bother communicating with somebody from another territory. There's oftentimes an effort, and even in these organizations like NCAI, the National Congress of the American Indian, and USET, and all of these, there's a variety of organizations, tribal organizations, and I hate that word, but I'll use it in that situation so you know what I'm talking about, that are meant to gather voices together. But unfortunately, it can be kind of milquetoast too. And there's also this effort to, for a lot of territories, to have some inroad to Washington or to Ottawa, or in the case of states, maybe to the capital of state, in New York State here to Albany, let's say. I mean, I know there are nations that spend millions of dollars with lawyers and lobbyists in both state capitals and the national capitals, and probably the provincial capitals too, for that matter. So we will invest in trying to maintain some corridors of communication with the state and with the federal government or with the provincial governments. But what do we do in the meantime from territory to territory? And I've talked about this before. I remember a few years ago, the Seneca Nation had developed, and I don't know if it even still exists, but it was called the Foreign Relations Committee. When I first heard that expression, I was, that's a good thing. Finally, they're going to have an agency or a committee that is going to ensure that they have lines of communication opened up from the Seneca Nation to other native territories. Unfortunately, that wasn't what it was about. The only foreign relations that they were interested in having was the United States, was Washington and Albany. And again, I come back to the same. To me, that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we aren't staying in communication. Look, I know there are events that happen. I mean, sometimes a tax fight. Somebody will have an initiative and say, look, we're going to have a steering committee, or we're going to put together a proposal for, most of the time it's for legislation, federal legislation or state legislation. But rarely do we say, okay, let's just maintain adequate diplomatic relations from native territory to native territory. Now, many of us do, on the private sector, we have friends in other territories. I mean, I'm Mohawk and I live in Seneca territory, so I maintain my relationships to people in other Mohawk territories. And of course, many of us have friends in other native territories that we stay in touch with. But that's still not, official diplomacy. So even as conversations continue to grow about sending somebody to the United Nations, which I support, or establishing an embassy in Washington, D.C. or Ottawa, which, okay, I get it. But if we aren't standing together with our own people, with people other Ongwe, then we're missing the boat, folks. And this is where identities can be more easily shaped. This is where we can address, what is the official position on any number of topics. I'm not, Colin Kaepernick is doing fine without us, frankly. He doesn't need our support, but why not have the support? We haven't even officially endorsed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in most territories. Now, I mean, we could argue whether, and there's a lot of people who have criticisms about the United Nations, and I share most of those criticisms. But the whole idea that there is a declaration that essentially all of the nations of the world have put their signatures to, saying that, we think that there is a very least a minimum standard, which the United States isn't meeting, I might add, for Indigenous people, North Canada. So I think there are opportunities here to certainly have conversations with the folks in Washington, and have conversations with the folks at the United Nations. But I'll tell you, most of the time when we do that, who's communicating our interests in Washington? Is it a native voice? Is it somebody who has the background and the history of living on a native territory, or is it a Washington law firm? Well, it's obvious. It's a Washington law firm. I mean, there are law firms that have made entire careers. I mean, their entire portfolios are filled with just negotiating and pushing for new legislation and amending legislation. And I say the same thing over and over again. If they can legislate for us, then they can legislate over us. To me, the problem isn't that that Washington needs new laws supporting native peoples. We need to strip some of the stuff away and peel most of it back and say, look, this is unjust. This is illegal. And we're not going to have lawyers and lobbyists do that for us. But, even the idea of sending people to the folks or to places like the United Nations in New York or to Washington, D.C., it's kind of pointless if we haven't even reached out to our brothers and sisters in other native territories. We need to have better diplomatic relations with with the territories that we are closest to. I mean, I always talk about, the answer to the lie that is the global economy is the truth that is local economy. The worst part of a local economy is when that dollar leaves the area almost immediately because it can only change hands once or twice. That is not a vibrant economy. That is not an economy that is sustainable or sustains value for the dollars that come in or the value of things that come into a territory. And from a native standpoint, we not only need to have diplomatic relationships with the other nations around us, but we need to have commercial relationships. We don't have any formal trade agreements. I mean, from the eastern door to the western door, from Mohawks to Senecas, there's no official trade relations. The last piece of Seneca legislation or a resolution or whatever you want to call it that was passed relating to trade with other territories. It was one that condemned it. It was during when Robert Porter was crafting resolutions for the Seneca Nation, and what he did was he said it was illegal. It was unlawful for Senecas to engage in a commercial activity with non-federally recognized tribes. It was basically a slap at the Puspatuck and the Shinnecock in Long Island. I mean, so not only do we not press to have a more formal and acknowledged and supported and defended trade relations from territory to territory, native to native trade, we actually we actually saw the opposite done by native leadership, condemning trade because we can't have trade with a native people that we've been doing business with for decades if the federal government doesn't federally recognize them. So we don't get to choose who we have diplomatic relationships with or commercial relationships with. We're going to let the federal government determine that. I mean, that's the level of absurdity that has existed. Now, that time has passed, and there is trade relationships between native territories, including in Long Island today. But there isn't any kind of formal relationship. So it seems to me before we can really even adequately represent ourselves to some place like the United Nations or the U.S. Capitol, we've got to reach out to some of our own people. That's where our strength is. My wife was just saying the other day, how is it that some of these other nations, even though they were colonized by Spain or England or Italy or whatever. I mean, if you look at Africa and Pakistan, India, South America, how did these countries get independence? Well, I'll tell you, there was a lot of support at the international level, the United Nations in particular. They actually had a whole convention about decolonization and the whole idea of establishing independent states from these former colonies. We never were a part of that conversation. But the conversation that we had really kind of got back to unity. You're not going to get fight for your independence if you're a lone voice. And if Native people stood together, we're more willing to stand together. And I'm not saying that we've got to form, a confederacy. I'm not saying that we have to, create some sort of, organization, NGO or otherwise. I'm saying we don't need to have somebody else scrutinize what the relationship is, but we need to establish what that relationship is. So I guess out of this, looking at what transpired last year, and let's be honest, all those people at Standing Rock, for all those people at Standing Rock, and we I'm not saying that there wasn't some positive things that came out of it, but the pipeline got built. In Mohawk territory, when we had a standoff with Canada, not just with Quebec, but with Canada, in Oka, in Gunazadage, we resisted. And the plan which we were resisting, which was the expansion of a golf course, didn't happen. We stopped it. Now, I know it maybe isn't fair to compare the two because they are kind of apples and oranges. But we do have to at least acknowledge that there was a difference. There was a difference between when we stood up and we had success, when we pushed back on the state in 92 and 97 over taxation. We stood up and we fought back, and we came out of those conflicts, with a couple of bruises out of it, and some people got arrested and that kind of stuff. But we persevered in furthering our agenda. Now I look at Standing Rock and I kind of made a comment on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. How did all these activists who went to Standing Rock now all of a sudden they're traveling the world? What is their message? That we stood for Standing Rock and the pipeline got built anyway? I'm not trying to characterize it as a failure because I think there are some real positives that came out of it. But those positives don't matter if we don't seize upon some of the opportunity that should have been created there. And among those things that I think should have been pursued is this kind of diplomatic relationship. And I'm not just saying go to another territory and shake hands with the leadership there. Because for all the people who went there and pledged their support for Dave Archambault, he got voted out embarrassingly voted out of office in the next election. So all of that diplomatic relationship with the leadership seems to have been seems to be a waste. I think we have to understand what our communities are facing and what we can. So we need to build relationships that allow us to stand up to the opioid addiction issue, the suicide issue. There are any number of the missing and murdered Indigenous women. These are issues that we should be standing together with other territories. Forget about Amber Alerts. I want to see a red alert. And our people are pretty good at sending stuff via Facebook. But you know what? That's only one piece of social media. If we know that somebody is turned up missing, we should put something in place ourselves. So whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous women, whether it's the suicide issue, the drug or substance abuse issues, or whether it's what we are going to do going forward to fight cooperatively for economic development, for adjusting to climate change, for survival in what may be the wake of some major failures in the United States. Economic, political, social, all these things that I've talked about before that I'm concerned about. What are we doing to position ourselves to survive the next economic or man-made / natural disaster? I don't know that we're doing anything. I mean, if we're just waiting for something to happen and then we can knee-jerk react. Look, I know that we are beginning to have that conversation about food sovereignty and some of that stuff. And, so some of this stuff has begun. And, so I want to make it sound like nobody is doing anything because I don't think that's fair. But we aren't doing enough. We are not doing enough. We aren't spending enough time not just looking for the people that are easy to talk to. I think we have to have better communications from community to community. And I feel very strongly about it. I think if we're going to talk about unity, and if we're going to talk about our future, sustainability. Look, we talk about the Haudenosaunee and the strength. I mean, the obvious image is the 5 arrows, right? You can snap one, but put 5 of them together, and you can't snap them. There's strength in those numbers. How have we let it go so badly? I mean, it's not like we're not all related. I mean, half the time, in most families, there are people that have native relations in all different territories. But even with that, with that makeup of our blood, we aren't doing enough to maintain, beyond just the family relationships. We aren't doing anything more than that. I think we could be strong. I think we could be strong as hell if we had better relationships with other territories. And the means to mobilize people. Look, this isn't just about, leadership. This isn't just about federally recognized leaders that can pick up the bat phone and talk to each other. I'm talking about the people. We were doing these meetings for a while, and I remember back when Jacques was still with us, and he and we had a meeting right here in Cattaraugus, and I suggested that we should have a phone network, a phone tree, if you will. That when a situation arises, we could call a couple of numbers, and those numbers would spread, and people would be mobilized. So I'm not talking about tribal government, necessarily being the only means for having diplomatic relationships. We should know how to support each other. And I don't mean just, show up at one territory or another. There are many ways to fight a battle. One of the things about Oka in particular in Gunazadage was not everybody showed up in Gunazadage or in Ganawage. Many people did things in their own territories, including blocking rail and power lines and all kinds of things, highways. So not everything, and that should have been the lesson from Standing Rock. We didn't need 10,000 people sitting in a camp. We might have needed 100,000 people doing things in their own communities to support Standing Rock, and take it out on the people who need it. Take it out on. I give credit to my host and my co-host in New York, Shawnee Rice. I mean, she got arrested climbing a flagpole down in New York City in front of the Chase headquarters, the Chase bank headquarters, to dangle a flag out in front of their headquarters, saying, Chase is number 1 on Wall Street, but they're also number 1 in the Keystone XL pipeline, which ended up leaking 200,000 gallons of oil all over South Dakota. So there are people and places that can do things anywhere. She didn't have to travel to Kansas or to Nebraska or to North Dakota to fight the Keystone XL pipeline. You can do it in New York City. You can do it in any place that we live. So I guess this is part of the conversation that I'd like to see pursued. That we have a little bit more conversation with each other. We've got these great tools in terms of social media, right? All the social networking, Twitter and Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. We have all these tools, email, the internet. And yet, for all of this wealth of information at our fingertips, we still aren't communicating very well with each other. We live in the age of information technology. We live in the age of communication. And yet we are still bad communicators. And the thing is, our people were known for statesmanship. I mean, it's one of the things that the founding fathers of the United States kind of marveled at. You know, how did these people develop in such a way? How could they create order without hierarchy? How did they develop such diplomacy and statesmanship? My question is, where the hell did it go? You know, and again, this isn't a slap at quote unquote leadership. It's not. It's really. I think what I'm talking about is something that all of us should have a role in addressing. That's what I think is really important at this point. I think we need to do more. I think we need to do more to reach out. And you know, and then when you do have the haters, you know, somebody who wants to call down Colin Kaepernick for being invited to a sunrise ceremony, or this moron who calls up the American Indian Community House in New York City, wishing all kinds of ill on those folks. And yeah, we have haters all over the place. They become even less important. They become even more insignificant the more we demonstrate unity. And and the people who don't agree with us, we don't need them. We don't need to build a house of cards in terms of unification. What we need is to build some solid relationships. So anyway, that's my message with this show. I hope I gave you something to think about, to talk about, and maybe we'll have more conversations about it in the future. But these are my observations. So let's see where some of them go. Hey, I want to thank you for listening. I will be back here on Monday night, and we'll never run out of things to talk about. So we'll see you Monday. Yahweh.